Thank you, everybody. Thank you for taking your time and coming at this meeting. I will do first the presentation. I have a text like 4 pages. I couldn't make it shorter. And afterwards, I guess that you have many comments and questions and remarks to make. Kosovo is being told that its EU membership is at least 1 decade far away from us. Just as we should be certain that we will be an EU member one day, likewise we should be certain that it won't happen anytime soon. We cannot predict how far it can really be, but how far at least is. So we know that it can be better than this, while it could be worse, of course. The impossibility of prediction of Kosovo's membership to EU is not conditioned by is conditioned by at least 4 factors. First, economic stagnation and social misery, which prevails in Kosovo, with GDP per capita at only around 3,000 euros. 45% of the population live with less than $2 per day, and another 18% are in extreme poverty. They live with less than $1 per day, which means that they cannot get 2,100 calories per day, and they are hungry on a daily basis. And over half of working population are unemployed. Second, widespread corruption of local political elites. So there is a sort of a deal between international bureaucrats in Kosovo and local political elite, where international bureaucrats tolerate the local corruption because they pay back to them with political obedience and submissiveness. And in this way, the short-term stability is preserved. But there are also 2 other reasons which have to do with EU itself. First, 5 EU member states do not recognize Kosovo. Greece, Romania, Spain, Cyprus, and Slovakia do not recognize Kosovo, while 22 other EU members do recognize the Republic of Kosovo. And secondly, in a decade or so, neither EU knows where it will be. So they tell us that at least for a decade you will not be a member of EU. We do not know when. Certainly you will be, but after a decade, as we know, neither EU is aware where it will be. Until then, the issue of integration of Kosovo into EU has been replaced with the issue of visa liberalization. Kosovo didn't start yet the negotiations with EU regarding visa liberalization, but we have been promised the start of the dialogue, which is supposed to come just before negotiations for visa liberalization, at the end of which we get visa liberalization. Kosovo is the only country of the region without visa liberalization. The entire world came to Kosovo, but citizens of Kosovo can go only in 4 countries without visa, which is 4 times less than citizens of Afghanistan. However, this isolation from the world somehow made Kosovo endure only milder losses during world financial crisis of 2008, with the pensionist trust fund losses, while maintaining budget imbalance with no deficit and no major debt. Visa liberalization for EU is somewhat the opposite of EU membership. The latter means achieving much higher standards of living in our country, while the former means abandoning our country together with its poor standards. So visa liberalization is offered as a scapegoat, as an exit from our own country. Even when Kosovo will become a member of EU, we will stay in Kosovo, not in some other countries. But visa liberalization functions as this other route, where you simply leave your country when your country cannot leave poor standards and join EU. Kosovo, together with other countries of the Balkans which are still not members of EU, are called countries of the Western Balkans, countries of still not integrated region of the Balkans, countries of Western Balkan region, or simply countries of the region, as they say so often in the media and in the institutions of Kosovo. Therefore, the region is the Europe outside EU. They don't even say countries in the region, but of the region, as if we don't create the region, but we come out from it. In Albanian language, this belongs to the gender case, thus the region is the gender to which we belong. So everything is composed as if integration has no alternative. You are either integrated in EU or you are integrated into the region which is waiting for EU integration. Just as EU countries create a collective imaginary of a flat entity where you become equal with others once you're there, likewise the countries of region apparently seem equal, simply still not members of the EU. But if Kosovo wants to materialize this equality in the form of, let's say, territorial integrity or sovereignty, then we are reminded that we are sui generis case, a case of no case, and therefore we should not dare compare ourselves with others in the neighborhood. We are a country of the region only in the sense that this region is still not part of EU. Region has this negative essence. While the region is shrinking via integration of its countries into EU, Kosovo is being held back in comparison to the countries of the region. Just like in former Yugoslavia, when others were republics and Kosovo only an autonomous province, when others were getting out from Yugoslavia one by one, while we remained the last one in it, in the same manner, Kosovo, which suffered most, together with Bosnia, is risking to be left in last place. As from June 2004, Croatia has been a candidate country for EU membership. A session of Croatia is foreseen for 1st of July 2013. The former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia got candidate country status for EU membership in 2005. On 19th of December 2009, visa liberalization entered into force. In December 2010, Montenegro was granted the candidate country status for EU membership. On 29th of April 2008, EU and Serbia signed the Stability and Agreement, Association for Agreement for Stability and what was I forgot this? Sorry. In a month's time is expected for Serbia to be granted a candidate country status. On 16th of June 2008, EU and Bosnia signed the SAA agreement. The SAA with Albania was signed on 12th of June 2006 and entered into force on 1st of April 2009. On 15th of December 2010, entered into force visa liberalization for the citizens of Albania, traveling to Schengen area. Albania is a potential candidate. So only Kosovo has no visa liberalization, and there is nothing in the sight regarding EU integration. But again, when it comes to Kosovo, things stand completely differently. When EU mentions Kosovo, there is always a footnote saying under UN Resolution 1244, or this put in the brackets. For example, when EU Commission describes political relations of Kosovo with EU, first it says that Kosovo has a clear European perspective in line with the European perspective of the Western Balkans region, and then continues by saying that EU helps ensure the stability of Kosovo through EULEX, rule of law mission in Kosovo, special representative in Kosovo, and Kosovo International Civilian Office. Therefore, you don't really see how Kosovo is advancing towards EU integrations, but the other way around, how EU missions are trying to integrate inside Kosovo. The Constitution of Kosovo, one should read from its last pages, from the end, not from the beginning, because there are the reserved rights of international protectorate in Kosovo. In addition, all officials of international protectorate, including those from EU, are not accountable to local institutions or local people, and they have immunity from criminal prosecution, together with their family members if they happen to be in Kosovo. EULEX, as rule of law mission, is consisted from 2,000 European policemen, prosecutors, and judges. EULEX is based on UN Resolution 1244, notorious six-point plan of Ban Ki-moon, which was an agreement between UN and Serbia several months after the declaration of independence of Kosovo, and the document of joint action of the Council of EU of the 4th of February 2008, which was published in official gazettes of EU on 16th of February 2008, exactly 1 day prior to declaration of independence of Kosovo. Declaration of independence of Kosovo took place on the 17th of February 2008, and 1 day before that, EU, in its official newspaper, published this document of joint action, according to which EULEX is established as a rule of law mission in Kosovo. So they wanted establishment and of EULEX, to conceive EULEX prior to declaration of independence, as if they knew that not all of the countries of EU are going to recognize independence of Kosovo. According to this document, Article 3H says that executive powers of EULEX over local institutions are not limited neither in scope nor in time. This rule of law mission is above the law, rendering law into something that separates people into those who are above it and those who are below it, rather than uniting people through equality in front of it. Yet, when EULEX speaks of rule of law, it doesn't link rule of law to the justice for citizens or rights of the people, but to the stability and security. Actually, EULEX defines itself as a crisis management operation. But why is this so? Where does it come from, this crisis management operation? These words, this terminology, these expressions, where do they come from? In July 2006, Javier Solana, who at that time was in charge of EU foreign and security policy, endorsed the concept of crisis management. July 2006. There are 23 ESDP missions around the world, European Security and Defense Policy missions, EULEX in Kosovo being the biggest one. So it's the biggest mission of EU outside EU. EULEX is an embodiment of this crisis management concept as a crisis management operation. But this crisis management stands in contrast to crisis resolution. So they do not say anymore crisis resolution, they say crisis management. As if crisis is here to stay, it merely has to be managed. Not to have an exit from the crisis, just prevention of explosion of crisis. Crisis therefore has been normalized. What is abnormal is only explosion of crisis and of course the absence of crisis. This approach prevented explosion of crisis, but at the same time kept us perpetually at the brink of it. Kosovo surely has many problems, but those cannot be resolved by those who consider Kosovo to be a problem. For almost 1 decade after the war, in Kosovo we had UNMIK as a UN mission ruling over Kosovo. United Nations mission in Kosovo after the war, since 1999. 3 years now, instead of UNMIK, we have EULEX, and similarly, instead of UN, we have EU. International community in Kosovo was neither international nor a community. Rather, it was a complex mixture of national interests and corporate profit of different states, from different states. But international community became what it was precisely in Kosovo. United Nations was not a place where the nations were united. United Nations were a battleground. Kosovo was the peace ground under the United Nations. In the same manner, we can speak today of EU. There can be no European police anywhere in EU as we have EULEX today in Kosovo. We can go further and notice that we don't have anywhere an EU army, except in Bosnia, where we have SFOR. Kosovo and Bosnia are these special situations where membership to EU is promised to them while they are being ruled by the entity that promises itself to them. Also because inside EU, for the EU, the economy is the issue, while outside EU, for the EU, security is the issue. So economy is the word inside the house, and security is for those who are outside of the house. The French philosopher Etienne Balibar, recalling the time of the ancient Greece, draw parallels between demos and Greeks on one hand, and ethnos and barbarians on the other. EULEX acts precisely in this way. Democracy is reserved for elsewhere, for other people, and again, they don't say simply Albanians, for example. They say ethnic Albanians, never failing to mention this adjective ethnic. So ethnos. So ethnic, which stands in contrast to nation. It doesn't fall in the same register as nation. It stands in contrast. Because ethnic, trying to define people according to some kind of immanent, inherent cultural core, which is exclusive according to its nature. So ethnic depoliticizes nation because puts it closer to nature and culture and removes it from its political, social, and historical background. EULEX is an external EU mission, but also it represents the real Ministry of Internal Affairs in Kosovo. This policy of security depoliticizes institutions. Every political resistance is considered to be a matter of security. One could be tempted and conclude that, oh, we, the Westerners, should not and cannot export democracy elsewhere in the world, that maybe those people, they don't want democracy in the first place, or that democracy can rise only from below by the people themselves, as they are now discussing regarding Afghanistan and other crises in the world. I don't want to discuss this because I believe that at this point in time, the very discussion would mask the real problem. So the problem was not that they were trying to impose democracy or that democracy brought to Kosovo was an imported democracy. Prior to all this, the problem was that it was not democracy. It was a doubly authoritarian structure in itself and for ourselves. Top-down command with no internal democracy inside UNMIK or EULEX. So you had head of UNMIK and then authoritarian structure, where, as Hannah Arendt explained it, in authoritarian structure, the fifth row is the absolute boss of the sixth row, but it's the absolute servant of the fourth row in the authoritarian pyramid. And also absolute domination of this pyramid over any local institution or agency, since they could sack ministers from their jobs just as they could annul laws passed by the Assembly, the international rulers. But EU in Kosovo didn't start with EULEX, and I think that this is what people mainly forget. They think that EU rule of law mission is what EU is in Kosovo. This is only 3 years now. Earlier on, it was not like this, but still EU was there. Even though today EULEX is main EU acronym in Kosovo, for a decade after the war, EU was heavily present in Kosovo. UNMIK used to have 4 pillars. United Nations mission in Kosovo had 4 pillars. Police and Department of Justice was the first pillar. Local administration was the second pillar. Democratization, so-called democratization pillar, OSCE pillar, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And fourth pillar was EU pillar, which was called economic reconstruction. So EU was also before in Kosovo as EU pillar, economic reconstruction of Kosovo after the war. What EU did in economically reconstructing Kosovo was basically privatization. Without any public or parliamentary debate, privatization was carried as the motor of transition, which turned to be the one from socialism directly to neoliberalism. As it happened in many other countries, in the name of excluding other possibilities except capitalism, they excluded other alternatives inside capitalism but neoliberalism. The entire privatization strategy was a chrono strategy. Not why, what, or how to privatize, but only when to privatize, simply because they didn't have administrative capacity to privatize all at once. 3 immediate consequences occurred. Capital was turned into property and not the other way around, since enterprises were not privatized as productive capacities, but as assets, where tons of machinery were sold as scrap metal. Secondly, being expropriated and without local production, Kosovo's trade became bigger than Kosovo's budget, while import only from Serbia grew as much as remittances from our diaspora. Kosovo turned into a country where you have circulation of capital without accumulation of capital. Thirdly, privatization did not bring liberalization, but shifted public and state monopoly into private hands. Factories were turned into trading centers and cultural venues into casinos. We entered a phase of capitalist without capitalism, of market without economy, moving forward strangely toward feudalism. What Kosovo became is not a nation state typical for the modern industrialization era, but rather a province of an empire, because as you know, EU likes to call itself as something which is more than UN, less than US. With no industry, with growing illiteracy and nepotism, with despotic party leaders heading weak political parties, with less cash and more commodity exchange between merchants, with budget collected only at the borders, with a capital town increased by bureaucracy and not economic development, with less water supply system and electricity as public service, and with more private generators of energy, with ethnicities as a postmodern euphemism for tribes in contrast to nations in modernity. What made people believe that this was capitalism is establishment of individualism as a principle and as a goal. Yet, individual freedom became market's freedom and not people's freedom, just like the individual choice became non-political choice. People could choose their toothpaste, TV channels in case they had electricity, and touristic destinations in case they had money. Without redefinition of EU presence in Kosovo, Kosovo will not change to become a member of EU. EU inside Kosovo must change in order for Kosovo not to remain outside EU one day. We need sustainable development, not short-term stability. But we should also be aware that development starts from inside, not from outside. EU could support us in economy, agriculture, education, healthcare, etc., and not by bringing special police units, prosecutors and judges who, by possessing immunity from law, rule with law in the name of the rule of law. Economic development integrates people, but development as production, not development as privatization. Furthermore, production collectivizes, while consumption individualizes. Every emancipatory project should start by efforts at depersonalizing the politics and politicizing democracy. And politics has to shift from being merely mediation and representation into vision and action. Thank you very much.